Richard, can I start with you?
Sure.
Carbon productivity. What the hell is it? How's it going to save us?
Probably the best way of describing it is, as you mentioned earlier, John. I was sitting having a meeting with my CEO, Patrick Thomas, and it was just after we had a breakthrough in chemistry. For the first time, we could take CO2. We found a catalyst, and we could use the carbon from CO2 to substitute oil in a polyol that went into mattresses, car seats, and flexible foams. And he started talking about this, the journey of the carbon molecule. And why are we just sending it up into the atmosphere? Why are we burning it? Why are we wasting it? We can do so much more with it. Now that we've had this breakthrough, you can start to see the closing of the carbon loop. And he was the one who basically sent me away to think about it. What did it mean? And of course, I don't think very long about these things without picking up the phone and calling John. So John and I had a conversation about, what does it all mean? And John very kindly then started me on a journey and introduced me to Systemic and to Future Fit and to our other partners. And really, we decided that we had something really interesting here because, as John mentioned earlier, return on capital employed is very easy for people to understand because you invest that capital and you get a return. And depending on what that return is, you will either get more investment or people will disinvest. If you look at carbon the same way, you start to see a journey where using carbon responsibly will give you a return. And just to give you an example, if you take oil and you make an insulation foam that goes into a refrigerator or into a house, you will save 70 times as much carbon over the life of that material as you've invested. If you put it into an LED, you'll save 50 times as much. And this is the work that Jeremy Oppenheim and his colleagues at McKinsey had done in 2008 when we're looking at the carbon abatement curves. And that's really what started us on the journey. When I sat down with Jeremy, I was amazed because he basically said I was the first person to come from industry and go back to McKinsey and talk about how we could use this in the future. What did it actually mean? So we'd all talked about it in industry, but nobody had actually taken it further. So we saw a real opportunity of bringing this consortium together. And I have to tell you, from a Covestro perspective, there is a real interest in this. We have two chemistries. We are described by Handelsblatt when we became independent from Bayer as a startup with an 80-year history of innovation, 16,000 employees and 12 billion of turnover, and two chemistries. And those chemistries contribute to lightweighting, to energy efficiency, and to driving new forms of energy generation, particularly in the alternative energy field. So our whole roadmap, our growth map, is based on sustainable development. We embrace the SDGs because that's the route. That is the roadmap to where we need to get to as a company and where we'll see financial growth in the future. So we're in an ideal position and it fitted very well, but we honestly believe the next step to take us on the next stage of that journey to drive growth even more is carbon productivity.
Covestro, you're championing this tool and this mindset. It has implications for your own business. I mean, some of your businesses will, or some of your products will look rather unpleasant seen through the lens. I think there will be some that will look rather less attractive than they would in normal circumstances. How do you deal with that, and how do you drive the innovation processes internally to ensure that you're not disrupted by your own tool?
Sustainability and innovation are not two separate things, and they can't possibly be, especially in a company like Covestro. They're totally intertwined. And, one of our targets is 80% of our R&D spend is targeted at the SDGs. Everything we do in Covestro in terms of innovation, whether it's product or process, is driven by the triple bottom line. And as far as to say that two of the P's must be positive for everything we do, and the third P cannot be negative. So we can be equal in terms of effect, but it cannot be negative. So it's constant improvement. And I think that's really important. When I took this concept to the board after we'd formed a consortium to get SEEK board approval, that exact question came out. What if we don't come out as well as some of our competitive materials? And my response was, isn't it better that we know that? Because if we don't know that today, you know, that is not a sustainable product going forward. When carbon pricing comes in, and to be honest with you, I welcome carbon pricing as well, because I think it's a necessary tool and really helps carbon productivity, because it gives you real figures at the back of it, and the investment market very much likes that as well. We need to know where we are, and we need to know where we need to grow the business and where we need to basically cut parts of the business. But as I said, I would say 70–80% of our business we are very confident about for the long term, because of the materials we're making and because of the applications in which they're being used. There are some areas, and possibly around the adhesives, coatings area, or in makeup or something else, that you have to look at. But personally, you know, I have a big issue, and I know my board member in charge of innovation and chief commercial officer, and soon to be, or next year will be the CEO, and he highlights this all the time. You take a mobile phone. A mobile phone is made with a casing from polycarbonate. That polycarbonate will last 70, 80, 100 years. The mobile phone has a fashion life of 18 months. That is a total and utter waste of a very good material. So what is going to happen in that market going forward? And these are the things that we as a material science company have to be thinking about, because unless we come up with alternatives or new solutions for this, somebody else will. So it's better to cannibalize yourself as well. And that's kind of the thinking that we have, and I know Herman backs me on this, as we go forward looking at innovation. It's really identifying where those problems are and coming up with a solution yourself. If I may just say one quick thing, and because Solar Impulse has been used a lot here. Solar Impulse, we became partners of Solar Impulse very early on in the journey. We contributed heavily to Solar Impulse 2, which went round the world. And I remember, after a number of conversations with Bertrand Piccard, he was asked a question, I think it might have been in India, was the plane recyclable? Which was a great question from some 14-year-old kid that was on the school trip. And Bertrand just looked at me and said, no. He said, and if it was, we'd not be flying this journey around the world. And it was getting that message across, because if it was made of steel or aluminium or glass or anything else, Solar Impulse would never have taken off. And it's this ability, to utilize materials to save energy, a good investment of carbon, at the end, and at the end of the life, if you think about it, you could incinerate the plane, capture the CO2 and pump it back in to the next plane if you wanted to do that. I mean, the problem is not the incineration, the problem is the emissions that incineration causes. But if you can extract the energy from the product and recycle the CO2 or the emission material, emission gases, that's a good circular flow of everything, really.
Well, hopefully the Solar Impulse 2 will end up in a museum, not in an incinerator.